Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to 9th century China, where the summer air hangs thick with fireflies and the scent of lotus blossoms. You're walking barefoot along a muddy riverbank, following the faint sound of chanting that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. And here's your reality check. You probably won't make it to the end of this story awake, because what we're about to experience is the original natural sleeping pill, Zen style. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment with your city and the time there. Let's see how many time zones we can gently lull to sleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins with a monk named Jianwu, which literally means simple awakening, though he felt anything but awakened. For 7 years he'd searched for enlightenment, sitting so still that spiders spun webs between his fingers. Then, one humid night, exhausted from yet another fruitless meditation session, he collapsed under an ancient Bodhi tree. As the moonlight filtered through the leaves, painting his robe with ever-shifting patterns, something remarkable happened. He fell asleep. Not just any sleep, but the kind where you wake up not knowing what year it is. Historians still argue whether Jianwu actually attained enlightenment or just had the world's most profound nap. But here's what we know. When he awoke, the first thing he said was, "The moon was my teacher all along." Not the tree, not the meditation techniques, the simple act of moonlight dancing on his closed eyelids. Here's a Zen fact for you. In many traditions, moonlight represents the cool wisdom that comes after the hot struggle of seeking. Like when you stop trying to fall asleep and suddenly you're asleep. Let's try a meditation together. Imagine your thoughts are those fireflies flickering around Jianwu. No need to catch them. Just watch them glow and fade, glow and fade. And remember Buddha's lesson. Sometimes what we seek comes when we stop seeking, like sleep, like peace. Like that moment when you finally stop rearranging your pillow and just let go. The morning after Jianwu's moonlit revelation, the monastery bell failed to ring. Not broken, just silent. The bell ringer pulled the rope with his usual strength, but instead of the deep bang that normally shook birds from their nests, there was only air. You'd expect panic in a place where time is measured by bell strikes. But the head monk simply nodded and said, "Good." Breakfast was served without announcement. Meditation began without summons. Even the novice monks, who normally needed reminders like cats need herding, somehow appeared in the hall at exactly the right moment. By afternoon, the silence had become its own kind of music. Without the bell's interruption, monks noticed how their breath naturally synchronized, how the bamboo grove had its own rhythm when no one was rushing to beat a gong. The kitchen staff, freed from strict meal schedules, began cooking when ingredients were perfectly ripe, rather than when metal told them to. Historians still argue whether this was a divine intervention or just an old rope finally giving out. But here's what matters. For 3 full days, the monastery operated in what Zen masters call jate-ma, the space between scheduled things. The bell eventually rang again. A novice finally thought to check the clapper, but something had changed. From then on, the monks heard the silence behind each strike, the pause where all possibilities live. Here's your meditation. With each exhale, Imagine you're that silent bell, not empty, but full of potential sound. The space between breaths. That's where the real teaching happens. And Buddha's lesson: the most important moments often come when nothing seems to be happening at all. The monastery's tea master, renowned for his perfect ceremonies, once served the abbot with visibly shaking hands. The porcelain cup clattered against the saucer. Hot water splashed onto the immaculate bamboo mat. A single tea leaf floated defiantly atop the brew, the ultimate disgrace in formal tea preparation. You could have heard a pin drop in that tea room. The abbot stared at the imperfect offering, then did something extraordinary. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, bellied guffaw that made his spectacles slide down his nose. Finally, he wheezed, "A human cup of tea." That day revolutionized the monastery's tea practice. The tea master began intentionally leaving one tiny flaw in each ceremony, an uneven pour, a slightly crooked whisk. These breathing spaces transformed rigid rituals into living art. Novices who once trembled during service now relaxed into the flow of mistakes, becoming moments of connection. Historians still argue whether that first accident was truly accidental. The tea master's journal simply states, "A trembling hand teaches what steady hands cannot." Here's today's meditation. As you breathe, imagine yourself as that wayward tea leaf, not wrong, just dancing to a different current. Your thoughts, steam rising however it pleases. Buddha taught that our imperfections are doorways, not defects. The crack lets the light in. The wobble makes the dance human. The spilled tea, that's where the real ceremony begins. A starving traveler arrived at the monastery gates during a brutal famine. The monks had barely enough rice for themselves, but the abbot welcomed him with an elaborate ceremony. He presented a pristine empty bowl, carefully arranging it between them as if it overflowed with delicacies. You'd expect anger or disappointment from the starving man. Instead, he burst into tears of gratitude. For 3 hours they sat contemplating that void, until something miraculous happened. The traveler's hunger pangs subsided. Not physically, but in his mind. "I came seeking food," he whispered, "but you fed me what no grain could satisfy." News spread of this meal of nothingness. Soon, other hungry souls arrived, not for handouts, but to learn this radical form of nourishment. The monks developed an entire philosophy around the empty bowl, how its perfect circle represents completion, how its hollowness holds infinite possibilities. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual genius or collective starvation hallucination. Modern science confirms that mindful focus can temporarily ease hunger, but these monks took it further. They discovered that true lack comes not from empty bellies, but from minds stuffed with wanting. Tonight's meditation: imagine your desires as that empty bowl, not to be filled, but to be held gently, honored, then set aside. Each breath, a spoonful of air that somehow satisfies more than a banquet. And Buddha's lesson: sometimes what appears to be deprivation is actually the universe offering its most nourishing gift, space to remember you were never hungry to begin with. Two monks sat arguing in the peach orchard as petals fell like pink snow. The butterfly dreamed it was human, insisted old Master Wen. No, countered young monk Ji. The human dreamed of being a butterfly. Their debate grew so heated that a real butterfly, probably offended, flew straight into Ju's rice bowl. Here's where it gets interesting. Instead of brushing it away, Ju froze. The butterfly's wings fluttered against the warm rice, creating tiny steam clouds. In that moment, both monks realized their argument was missing the point entirely. The miracle wasn't who dreamed, what it was that dreams and reality could feel equally vivid, equally temporary. The monastery adopted this butterfly mindfulness practice. Monks would place their hands over warm tea, feeling the vapor rise, contemplating, is this steam real? Are my thoughts? The kitchen began serving butterfly-shaped dumplings that dissolved on the tongue, a delicious reminder of reality's fleeting nature. Historians still argue whether the original butterfly survived its rice bath. Accounts vary. But the lesson remains. When you find yourself stuck in mental debates, sometimes what you need isn't an answer, but a warm bowl of rice and something beautiful crashing into it. Tonight's meditation. Imagine your thoughts are those peach petals, not to be caught or analyzed, just watched as they drift, drift, drift. And Buddha's lesson: reality is the dream we all agree to have together. The trick is remembering it's okay, even wonderful, to wake up sometimes. For generations, pilgrims had rubbed the stone Buddha's belly for good luck, polishing it to a glossy sheen while the rest of the statue weathered and cracked. Then one winter, an ice storm split the statue clean down the middle, revealing something astonishing inside. Not gold, not relics, but hundreds of tiny clay figures, each no larger than a thumbprint, stacked carefully in the hollow center. Farmers, dancers, children, elders, an entire miniature community hidden where no one thought to look. The head monk smiled as if he'd known all along. Of course, he murmured. How else could enlightenment work? A new practice emerged. Instead of rubbing the Buddha's belly, visitors would sit with their backs against the broken statue, imagining all the unseen supports in their own lives. The kitchen staff baked, hidden helper, buns, bite through the crust to find sweet bean paste smiling back at you. Even the gardens were replanted to bloom from the inside out, with fragile flowers protected by sturdy leaves. Historians still argue whether those clay figures were ritual objects or some long, dead monk's secret art project. But here's what matters: that broken statue taught more in its fractured state than it ever did whole. Tonight's meditation, picture yourself as that stone Buddha, not as you appear outwardly, but all the unseen supports within you, the forgotten kindnesses, the quiet strengths, the inner community that holds you up even when you feel hollow. And Buddha's lesson: we're all stronger than we look, especially when we dare to crack open. The monsoon arrived early that year, catching the monastery's laundry crew mid-sun drying. Robes went from crisp to soggy in seconds. Ink on precious scriptures bled into Rorschach blots, and the newly swept courtyard became a shallow lake. Just as the head monk opened his mouth to presumably deliver some profound Zen wisdom about impermanence, young novice Xiao burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, the kind of full-body laughter that makes you wheeze and clutch your ribs, the kind that's dangerously contagious. Soon the entire monastery was howling as they watched their carefully laid plans float away like so many paper boats. The head monk, tears streaming down his face, gasped between giggles. What snort, spent all morning, wheeze, fighting the sky. This became the annual Fool's Flood Festival. Monks would purposefully leave scrolls in the rain to watch the ink bloom unpredictably. The kitchen created monsoon buns that collapsed messily when bitten. And everyone learned to distinguish between two kinds of disasters: those that mattered and those that made great stories later. Historians still argue whether that storm was particularly funny or if sleep deprivation finally caught up with the monks. But the lesson remains: when life soaks you to the bone, you've got two choices: shiver or shake with laughter. Tonight's meditation: imagine each raindrop is a tiny joke the universe is telling. You don't need to understand the punchline to feel the joy. And Buddha's lesson: enlightenment won't keep you dry, but it might help you dance in puddles. The monastery's most priceless artifact, a 400-year-old Celadon vase gifted by an emperor, sat undisturbed in the meditation hall for generations, until one sleep-deprived novice, bleary-eyed from overnight chanting, tripped over his own robes and sent it crashing to the floor. Silence. Then, a sound no one expected: the tinkling laughter of the oldest monk present. At last, he wheezed, wiping his eyes. That vase finally fulfilled its purpose. As the shards were gathered, something remarkable happened. Each monk took a fragment and discovered the broken edges fit perfectly against their palms. Better than the whole vase ever had. The shards became meditation tools, their irregular shapes keeping practitioners present in ways smooth pottery never could. The kitchen started serving broken bowl meals where dishes were intentionally fractured and reassembled with gold lacquer. Historians still argue whether that novice actually tripped or performed the monastery's most effective teaching act. Modern science confirms what these monks discovered: our brains engage more deeply with imperfect, irregular patterns than with flawless ones. Tonight's meditation: imagine your flaws are those vase shards, not mistakes, but edges that help you grip reality better. And Buddha's lesson: sometimes destruction is just creation wearing different robes. For 17 years, Pilgrim Hong crossed the same arched footbridge to reach the monastery, wearing the same straw sandals, carrying the same empty satchel. Each visit, the monks would ask what he sought. Each time, he'd smile and say, "Just crossing." Then one autumn, halfway across his usual journey, Huang stopped, not from fatigue, but because he suddenly saw the bridge for the first time. Really saw it. The way morning light turned its weathered planks gold. How its curved shadow in the river below formed a perfect circle. How the wood groaned different songs in summer heat versus winter chill. He sat down right there in the middle, legs dangling over the water, and laughed until birds took flight. When monks found him there days later, still chuckling, they didn't urge him to continue. Instead, they brought tea and sat beside him. The bridge meditation was born, where monks would spend entire afternoons noticing how a single span changes when you stop trying to get across it. The kitchen started serving journey cakes, meant to be eaten so slowly they tasted different with each bite. Historians still argue whether Huang ever reached the monastery that final year. But his lesson remains: any path becomes sacred when you stop treating it as a means to an end. Tonight's meditation: imagine your breath is that bridge, each inhale a plank, each exhale the river flowing beneath. You don't need to reach either bank. And Buddha's lesson: enlightenment isn't at the end of the journey. It's in the creak of the wood beneath your feet. The monastery's bamboo forest was never silent, not truly. At night, when human activity ceased, the hollow stems began their secret conversations. Monks swore they could hear teachings in the creaks and knocks as stalks rubbed together in the wind. But one summer evening, the grove fell completely still, and that's when the real lesson began. You're standing at the edge of that bamboo sea when it happens. No rustling, no clicks, just the occasional plink of dew sliding off leaves. At first it feels wrong, like a bell that won't ring or a stream that's forgotten how to flow. Then, gradually, you notice the other sounds, your own pulse in your ears. The distant huff of an owl, the way your robe whispers against itself when you breathe just so. By dawn, the monks had developed empty ear meditation, listening not to sounds but to the spaces between them. The kitchen staff created silent soup, served without slurping. Even the monastery chickens seemed to cluck more softly. Historians still argue whether the bamboo actually stopped talking or if everyone simply started hearing differently. Modern acoustic research shows bamboo groves do have natural, silent periods, when humidity aligns just right, but that's not the point. Tonight's meditation, imagine your mind is one of those hollow bamboo stalks, not empty, but resonating with whatever passes through. Thoughts come, thoughts go, the space remains, and Buddha's lesson. The most profound teachings often come dressed as absence. Winter came early the year the lotus pond froze solid, not just a thin crust, but thick ice that trapped the plants in mid-bloom. The monks gathered at the edge, breath puffing white in the air, staring at the impossible sight-perfect flowers suspended like jewels in glass. Young novice Mai started chipping at the ice with a kitchen knife. "We have to free them," she insisted. The gardening master stayed her hand. "Look closer," he murmured, and there it was, the secret the pond was keeping. Those seemingly trapped lotuses, their stems had already withdrawn, retreating to the safety of the mud below. What appeared to be flowers were actually ice crystals that had formed around the memory of blossoms. More perfect than any real petals could be, the monastery adopted this frozen lotus meditation each winter. Students would contemplate how what seems like imprisonment might actually be protection, how beauty persists even in dormancy. The kitchen created translucent, ice dumplings with sweet centers that only revealed themselves when warmed in the mouth. Historians still argue whether those ice flowers were a natural phenomenon or some clever monk's midnight artistry. Modern physics confirms such crystalline formations are possible under exact conditions, but the monks needed no explanation. Tonight's meditation, imagine your worries are those lotus stems, not gone, just wisely retreated until warmer times. The icy surface, that's just nature's way of saying, this too shall pass, and Buddha's lesson. There's wisdom in knowing when to bloom, and when to let the ice do the shining for you. A ragged beggar arrived at the monastery gates clutching a solid gold bowl, priceless by any measure. The monks gasped when he used it to collect scraps, its gleaming surface reflecting potato peels and day-old rice. "That belongs in a temple altar," sputtered the head cook. The beggar simply smiled and tapped the bowl's rim, producing a tone so pure it silenced the kitchen. "What better altar," he asked, "than a hungry man's hands?" The lesson infected monastery life like yeast in dough. The calligrapher began writing sutras on used vegetable wrappers. The gardener planted flowers in cracked water jugs, most radical of all. The tea master started serving ceremonial matcha in rough clay cups, the kind that warm your palms and make every sip taste like earth and sky. Historians still argue whether that beggar was actually a visiting Zen master in disguise. Carbon dating confirms the bowl was genuine Ming Dynasty treasure, but that's not what matters. What matters is how its golden surface looked holding that first steaming portion of monastery stew, like the sun rising in a beggar's cupped hands. Tonight's meditation. Imagine your body is that golden bowl, not for display, but for holding exactly what's needed in this moment. Your hunger, just the universe's way of saying there's more to taste, and Buddha's lesson. Holiness isn't preserved behind glass. It's measured by how willingly it gets scraped by life's wooden spoon. The annual cloud watching competition was the monastery's most hotly anticipated event, though you'd never guess from the competitors' serene faces. Monks would lie on their backs in the grassy courtyard for hours, motionless as stones, while the head abbot judged who could see nothing. Not nothing, as in empty space. Nothing, as in seeing clouds as clouds, without imagining dragons or faces or cotton candy. Just water vapor doing its water vapor thing. Last year's champion, Old Master Lu, achieved the near impossible. He fell asleep mid-competition and still won by default when all other monks started seeing shapes in his snore clouds. This year's dark horse was novice Jing, who shocked everyone by pointing at the clear blue sky and declaring, "That one's my favorite." The abbot nearly dropped his judging scroll. "What do you mean, that one?" "There's nothing there," Jing just smiled. Exactly. The kitchen commemorated the event with empty sky buns, plain steamed dough with no filling, that somehow tasted sweeter than any confection. Monks began practicing blue sky meditation, focusing not on objects, but on the space between them. Even the monastery cats took up bird, watching without the birds. Historians still argue whether Jing's answer was profound wisdom or a lucky guess from a sleep-deprived teenager. Modern meteorologists confirm that what we call clear skies actually contain countless microscopic particles, but the monks weren't concerned with technicalities. Tonight's meditation, imagine your thoughts are that empty sky, vast enough to hold clouds, but complete without them. The blue isn't background, it's the main event, and Buddha's lesson. Sometimes enlightenment isn't about seeing more, but about being comfortably, peacefully blind. The monastery courtyard had one immortal maple tree that shed leaves year-round, a botanical impossibility that drove neat, freak novices to distraction. No matter how diligently they swept, the stones were always dusted with crimson within hours. One autumn, the new groundskeeper, a former mathematician, became obsessed with solving the leaf equation. He charted falling patterns, calculated sweep angles, even developed a complex bamboo rake technique. His final discovery: the tree wasn't messy, it was generous. Those fallen leaves were actually feeding the roots below. Completing a perfect circle, the broom wielders kept interrupting. The monks adopted a radical new practice, sweeping leaves onto the roots rather than away. The kitchen created circular cakes with no beginning or end. Even the monastery's notoriously aloof cat started bringing dead mice to the tree base as offerings. Historians still argue whether that maple was a unique hybrid or just really bad at seasonal cues. Modern arborists confirm some trees do exhibit continuous leaf drop, but the monks needed no scientific validation. Tonight's meditation, imagine your breath is that maple tree, giving and receiving in one endless rhythm. Your thoughts, just leaves returning to source, and Buddha's lesson, what we call mess, is often nature's perfect order in disguise. When 108-year-old Master Ling knew his time was near, he did something unexpected. He lit every lantern in the meditation hall. Not the usual single flame marking the Buddha's presence, dozens of dancing lights that made the wooden walls glow like sunset. Enough darkness, he whispered as monks gathered around. The path was never meant to be walked in shadow. Then, with theatrical flair only a century of wisdom allows, he blew them all out at once, except one. That final flickering light he placed in Novice Anne's trembling hands. "Your turn now," he said, and closed his eyes for the last time. The monastery transformed overnight. Hallways stayed gently illuminated. The kitchen kept a perpetual pot of congee warm on the hearth. Even the strict silent periods became less about enforced quiet and more about choosing when to speak. Historians still argue whether Master Ling knew about the scientific study showing how dim light boosts creative thinking. But the lesson was never about lumens, it was about legacy. That one lantern still burns in the hall today, tended by successive generations of novices. Tonight's meditation. Imagine your heartbeat is that enduring flame, not yours alone, but passed through countless hands before yours. The darkness around it, just space for new light to grow. And Buddha's final lesson. Enlightenment isn't a destination, it's making sure the light outlasts the lantern. As our journey through these Zen stories comes to a close, let the images gently fade like lantern light at dawn. The moonlit kitchen, the silent bell, the laughing monks in rain. Each tale a stepping stone across the pond of your mind, now settling into soft mud. Breathe in the scent of imaginary lotus blossoms beneath ice. Breathe out the sound of that golden bowl's perfect tone. Your thoughts may drift like peach petals or maple leaves. Let them. Your body may feel heavy as Master Liang's sleep, inducing congee. Let it. The space between wakefulness and dreams isn't a border to cross, but a wide country to wander. Remember, enlightenment isn't some distant peak, but the weight of your head, finding the pillow just right. Wisdom isn't complex, it's the simplicity of a single flame in darkness, a single leaf on still water, a single moment when you forget to try and suddenly are. The stories will keep circling like seasons in the monastery courtyard. For now, let them go. Let everything go. As effortlessly as clouds releasing rain, as naturally as breath becoming air. Sweet dreams, traveler. The lantern is lit, the path is open. Rest,